Two houses can sit side by side under the very same sun, and one of them is a furnace inside, while the other stays cool and easy, and it is not the air conditioning that makes the difference, for neither has any. It is the house itself. One was built and kept in a way that keeps the heat out, and the other lets it pour straight in. Most folks, when their house bakes in the summer, I think the only answer is to buy a machine and pay to run it. But the old builders knew that a house can be made to stay cool on its own, by the way it is, built and shaded and vented, and it comes down to three plain things. Understand those three and you can pull the heat out of near any house, small or large, for little or nothing. Today I'm going to show you why your house gets so hot and the three old ways to cool it. I am Elias and I keep up this Lancaster County place with no tie to the public power company. So I have no grid air conditioning to fall back on, and I have had to understand how a building itself holds heat or sheds it. Now, I have given you videos already on cooling your own body in the heat and on placing a fan to move the air, and I will not go back over all that here. Today is about the house itself, the shell of it, why it heats up and how you make it stop, which is a different thing. And the deepest fix of all. There are three old principles, and the old builders lived by all three: insulation, ventilation, shading. Let me take you through each. Quick word before I go further. The old methods my family uses, there is more of it than fits in any one video. I gathered the whole of it into a book at eliasoder.com. The book is the long version. If you want it, it is there. I will not mention it again. When I was young, I never understand why my grandfather's old stone farmhouse stayed so cool on a blazing day when the newer frame houses, roundabout, were like ovens inside. I asked him once, sweating, why his house was cool as a cellar in July, and he took me round and showed me. Patient, the way he showed me everything. He showed me the thick stone walls that drank the heat slow. He showed me the deep eaves that threw shade on the windows through the high sun, and the big trees set on the west and south. He showed me the little louvered vents up under the eaves and the cupola on the barn, where the hot air poured out the top. He had not read it in any book. It was simply how his people had always built, handed down the knowing of how to make a house live easy with the sun, instead of fighting it. Not one bit of it used any power, and I have never forgotten walking into that cool, dim house out of the blazing yard and understanding that a building itself can be made to keep you cool. That is the knowing I want to hand you now. But first understand plainly why a house gets hot at all. For once you see it, the three fixes make perfect sense. The heat comes at your house from the sun, beating down on the roof and the walls, all the long day. That surface, the roof, especially, soaks up that heat until it is fair scorching, and then that heat works its way down and inward through the roof and the walls and radiates into the rooms below, and the hot air being light rises and gathers up under your ceiling and in your upstairs. So there are three places to fight it. You can stop the heat from getting through the roof and walls in the first place, which is insulation. You can give the hot air that does build up a way to escape up and out, which is ventilation. And you can keep the sun from ever striking the walls and windows so hard to begin with, which is shading. Insulation, ventilation, shading. Now let us take them one at a time. The first is insulation, and it means putting a barrier between the hot surface and the room so the heat cannot pass straight through. Think of a pot holder When you take a hot pan off the stove, you do not grab it with your bare hand. You use a thick cloth pad that stops the heat from passing into your skin. Insulation is a potholder for your house. The roof is where it matters most, for the roof takes the worst of the sun all day, and a metal roof especially gets blazing hot. So, under that roof, you want a layer of insulation to stop that heat from radiating down into the house. But here is the part most folks get wrong, and it is the whole secret of doing it right. The insulation must not be pressed flat and tight against the hot roof. There must be an air gap between the roof and the insulation. Why an air gap? Because if you leave a space there, the heat that comes off the underside of the hot roof warms the air in that gap, and that hot air being light rises and moves along the gap and escapes out the vents at the eaves and the ridge, carrying the heat away with it before it ever reaches the insulation. The air gap lets the heat run out, sideways and up and away, instead of driving down into your rooms. So, the rule is insulate the roof, but leave that gap so the roof can breathe and the heat can escape. Insulation pressed tight against a hot roof does far less good than insulation with a breathing gap behind it. That is the old builder's trick, and it makes all the difference. And there is one more plain thing on the roof worth knowing: the color of it. A dark roof drinks the sun's heat, and a light one turns much of it away, which is why you will see the hot countries paint their roofs and walls white or light, and why a light-colored or shiny roof runs far cooler than a dark one, baking in the sun. If ever you roof or paint, the lighter color is the cooler choice by a good measure, and a bright, shiny foil laid in that roof insulation helps too, for it turns back the heat that would radiate down, bouncing it away rather than soaking it up. So, light roof, a bright reflective layer, and the breathing air gap behind the insulation, all working together, keep that fierce roof heat from ever reaching your rooms, and your walls the same, for the walls take the sun too, especially the ones the afternoon sun beats on. If your walls are of masonry, of block or stone or brick, there is something worth understanding about how they hold heat, for it works both for you and against you. A heavy masonry wall soaks up the contact sun's heat slowly all through the day, and because it soaks it up slow, the inside of the house stays cool through the day while the wall is still drinking the heat in. That is the good part, and it is why an old stone house feels cool and cellar-like on a hot afternoon. But here is the other side of it. All that heat the wall soaked up through the day has to go somewhere, and come evening and night when the air cools, that wall lets all its stored heat back out into the house, so that your house grows warm. At night, just when you want it cool, you will have felt this if you live in a masonry house. A wall that is warm to the hand late in the evening, giving back the day's sun. So, if you want to, fight that. You build a second inner wall, or a lining with an airspace between it and the masonry, a gap again, so that when the wall gives back its heat at night, that inner barrier and the air gap keep it from pouring straight into your rooms. The air gap is the friend of the cool house at every turn in the roof and in the walls. Both. The second principle is ventilation, the moving of air, and this one is about getting the trapped hot air out of the house. For no matter how well you insulate, some heat builds up inside, and hot air rises and gathers up high, under the ceiling, up in the attic, up in the top of the rooms where it sits, trapped, and makes the whole house stuffy and close. The answer is to give that hot air a way to escape up and out at the top and let cooler air draw in low to replace it. Now, the old people were masters of this, and you need only look at an old barn to see it. A barn is a great tall building full of hay and animals that would bake in the summer. And how did the old builders keep it from cooking? They put a cupola on top, that little raised structure with louvered sides you see on the peak of every old barn. And it is not just for looks. It is a vent. The hot air rises up through the barn and pours out those louvers at the very top, and cooler air draws in below, and the barn breathes and stays bearable. That is the whole principle. An opening at the top for the hot air to escape. You can do the same. On a house, there is a kind of roof, vent, a turbine that spins in the wind, that you can set on your roof, and when the breeze blows, it turns, and the turning draws the hot air up out of your attic and throws it out with no power at all. Just the wind doing the work. You see them on the roofs of barns and workshops and factories everywhere, spinning away, pulling the heat out, or a simple ridge vent along the peak of the roof does the same, quieter, letting the hot air seep out the very top and down lower, high up on your walls near the ceiling. You can put vents or louvers that let the hot trapped air near the ceiling escape, the way the old houses had those little louvered openings up high for just this reason. The old builders put openings up high to let the hot air out and openings down low to let the cool air in. So the house drew a constant gentle current through itself, the cool coming in low and the hot going out high. Get the air moving through and up and out, and you carry the heat out with it. And there is a natural power that drives this for you, free, if you set your openings right. For hot air rising is itself a kind of engine. When you have an opening down, low on the cool shaded side and an opening up high on the far side, the hot air rising and escaping up high actually pulls fresh, cooler air in through the low opening behind it, a steady draft, flowing through the house all on its own, with no fan and no power, just the natural rising of the hot air, doing the work. The old builders called this the draw, and they set their windows and vents, high and low, and on opposite sides to make the house breathe itself. So think, not just of openings, but of low openings and high openings on different sides. So the air has a path to flow in, low and out high. A single window does, little, but a low one and a high one, across from each other, make a river of air through the house, and open the house on the shaded cool side to draw from, not the hot sunny side. So the air you pull in is the coolest you have, and the moving air helps you in another way, through the fan, which I have spoken of before, so I will keep it short. A fan, it does not cool the air, but it moves it, and moving air over your skin dries the sweat and carries your body heat away, so you feel cooler even when the air is not, and the moving air stirs up the still, stuffy, humid air of a closed room and helps it feel fresher and less closed. So a fan run off my solar set to move the air through the house and over. The body works hand in hand with the venting to keep you comfortable. The venting carries the heat out of the house, and the fan keeps the air stirring over your skin. The third principle is shading, and it is the simplest of all, keeping the sun from ever striking your walls and windows so hard in the first place. For the sun pouring through a window or beating on a wall is the greatest single load of heat your house takes. So if you can stop that sun before it lands, you have stopped the heat before it starts. Think of it as holding a parasol over your house. When you stand in the blazing sun and open a parasol over yourself, the sun no longer strikes you. It strikes the parasol and you stand in cool shade. Shading a house is the same. You contrib something that casts a shadow over the hot walls and windows. So, the sun lands on the shade and not the house. Now, which shade you want depends on where the sun comes from, and this is worth understanding. When the sun is high overhead in the middle of the day, a shade that sticks out over the top of a window, an awning, or an overhang or a canopy, will throw a shadow straight down over the window and block that high sun nicery. The old houses had deep eaves and porch roofs for just this, to shade the walls and windows from the high sun. But in the late afternoon, the sun drops low in the west and comes at your house near, sideways, low and level, right in under any overhang. And that low afternoon sun on the west wall is the fiercest heat of the whole day. An overhead awning cannot stop a low sideways sun. For that, you need shading that stands up and down. Vertical shades, fins or slats set out from the wall on the west side, or a trellis, or shutters, or a tree, or tall shrubs. Something that stands vertical to block that low sideways sun. So, overhead shades for the high midday sun, and vertical shades for the low western afternoon sun. Shade the west wall above all, for that is where the worst heat comes, and the light still comes in, mind just softened and broken and shorn of its scorching heat. So you are not shutting yourself in the dark, only cutting the fierce of it. One thing worth knowing on the shading, that it does far more good outside the glass than inside it. A blind or a curtain on the inside of a window helps some, but by then the sun has already come through. The glass and its heat is already in the room. Far better to stop the sun outside. The window with an awning, a shutter, a shade, a vine, a tree, so it never passes through the glass at all. The old shutters that close over the outside of a window, the deep porch, the awning, the shade tree, all stop the sun before it enters. Shade from the outside, and you turn the heat away at the wall. Shade only from the inside, and you have already let it in. So reach for the outside shade first wherever you can. Now let me be honest about one thing that shapes all of this: the difference between a dry heat and a wet, humid heat, for it changes what helps you most. In a dry country, the air is thirsty, and moving air and evaporation cool you wonderfully. The fan and the breeze do great work. But in a humid country, where the air hangs heavy and wet, that heavy, damp air is itself much of the misery, for the sweat cannot dry off your skin when the air is already full of water, and so you feel hotter than the temperature alone would say. In that humid case, the moving of air matters even more, not because it cools the air, but because stirring the air and drawing it through helps the damp move off your skin and keeps the stale, wet air from sitting close around you. So, in the humid places, lean hard on the ventilation, the drawing of air through and up and out, and the fans to keep that heavy air moving rather than sitting stagnant. The venting and the moving air are your best friends where the heat is wet. Now, the small, honest word on why so few houses are built this way anymore, and it is not a wicked plot, only the plain shape of things. It is quicker and cheaper to throw up a house fast, thin-walled and poorly vented and unshaded, and then hang an air conditioning machine on it and let the buyer pay to run that machine forever, than it is to build a house that stays cool on its own by good sense. The builder saves his money on the quick house, and the power company makes its money on the machine running all summer, year on year. And the old knowing of insulation and venting and shading, which costs nothing to use but must be built in with care and thought, gets left out, because no one down the line profits by it. The cool house built by wisdom pays nobody a monthly bill, so the old ways kind of building cool got quietly set aside in favor of the fast house and the machine bolted on, not because anyone decided to bury them, but because the money all ran the other way. So, there are the three old ways to cool. A hot house, insulated above all, the roof with an air gap behind the insulation, so the heat can escape, rather than drive down into your rooms. Ventilate it, giving the hot air away, to rise up and out at the top through a roof turbine, or a ridge vent, or a barn-style cupola with lower openings to draw the cool air in, and a fan to keep the air stirring and shaded, holding a parasol over the hot walls and windows, overhead shades for the high sun, and vertical shades for the low western afternoon sun, shading that west wall. Above all, do these three, and your house will stay cool on its own through the worst of the summer, small house or large, for little or nothing, the way the old houses and barns did long before there was a machine to buy. I would like to hear what your house is like in the heat. Tell me down below whether your house bakes or stays cool, and what it is built of, the wood or the block or the stone, and whether your roof is the metal that gets so hot. And tell me what part of the country you are in, and whether your heat is the dry kind or the wet, for it makes all the difference in what will help you most. I read what you write. Next time, I want to show you more of the old ways to cut your power bill down through the summer, past the cooling, alone. All the quiet places a house bleeds money and power through the hot months, and how the old people kept their costs down near to nothing. For once you stop leaning on the machine, there is a great deal more a body can save. Besides, the old builders raised houses and barns that stayed cool on their own through the fiercest summers, by understanding the plain principles of heat and building with care to insulate and vent and shade, and those buildings kept their people and their animals comfortable for generations with never a machine nor a power bill. There is a deep wisdom in a house built to work with the sun and the wind rather than to fight them with a machine. The people who built this country with their hands knew that.